The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
On behalf of RBCS and software test professionals, welcome to this webinar on advanced software testing reviews. I'm Rex Black, president of RBCS, a worldwide testing and QA firm. We serve clients that range from small startups to Fortune 20 global enterprises. We've been around since 1994, delivering insight and confidence to hundreds of clients around the world. And we have a team of international consultants who deliver customized training, consulting, and outsourcing services to companies that want to improve testing and quality assurance practices. I've written 10 books on software testing, including the bestseller Managing the Testing Process and a couple new ebooks, one on testing metrics and the other on improving the testing process. Those have been released on Amazon, as well as available on our website. We are presenting this webinar in partnership with Software Test Professionals. You can find their website at softwaretestpro.com. You can also see me delivering a pre-conference tutorial at their upcoming Software Test Professionals conference in October in Miami. Attending today's webinar might earn you credit for QAI and ASQ recertification. You can check with them to figure out how that works. Save the attendee email that you'll receive after this webinar as proof of attendance. You definitely need that attendee email if you want to claim PMI PDUs, which are available for this webinar. Thank you to Linda Thorne and Mike Lindhorst for reviewing the materials and making a number of valuable suggestions. You can visit pmi.org to claim the PDUs. You use the code ASTREV100. RBCS's provider ID is 2986. Please note that PDUs are available for live webinar attendance only. So if you are listening to a recorded version of this webinar, you will not have an attendance email. And if you attempt to claim those PDUs and are audited, PMI will not be happy with you. So some housekeeping notes before we start the presentation. If you have any questions, submit them at any time, but I do not check the questions until the end during the Q&A session, so please keep that in mind. Presentation copies are available on the web, rbcs-us.com. Navigate to the Resources tab in the upper middle of the home page. Navigate down there to the basic library, and you will find the PDF version of the slides there. You are also automatically entered to win a free e-learning by attending this, so check your email over the next couple days. If you are having any problems with the audio or visual components, please contact GoToWebinar support. Usual cause of problems are either browser incompatibility, company firewalls, or security restrictions that prevent you from installing the GoToWebinar software or audio settings on your PC. Though today we managed to discover a new way to have problems at the afternoon session, which was to have a external hard drive to which a recording was being made decide to disconnect itself in the middle of the recording, which caused some glitches. We'll hope that that will not repeat again tonight. So I hope you enjoy this free webinar. These are a service to the software testing community because at RBCS we are a not-just-for-profit company. So this webinar is part of a larger series on advanced software testing. This particular one came from my book, Advanced Software Testing Volume 2, which is for test managers. Probably this might be the last in the series. The series has been going on for a little over a year. There's a number of recorded webinars out there. I think we're probably done. There might be one or two others, but this is probably the last one. But anyway, we're covering reviews, which are a form of static testing. It's any sort of test where you're not actually executing the software that you're testing. So, not to be confused with static analysis, it's covered in the previous webinar, which is recorded and available on the digital library. In static analysis, you're doing a static test with tools. In a review, the bug-finding instrument, if you will, is not a tool, as it is in static analysis, but rather is the human brain. We're going to leverage the experience, wisdom, and insight of the reviewers to try to improve our work products. Now, 4 general types of reviews for software work products as opposed to projects and processes. More on those in a minute. So we have the informal type of review. You know, is pretty much anytime 2 or more people are discussing somebody's work product, we could call that a review. If the objective is to gain understanding or to find defects, brainstorm possible improvements. So this could be, anything that we do in hallway chats and so forth. And, most reviews probably do fall into this category, most of the reviewing that happens. We have technical reviews where there is an actual documented process. Should involve the technical experts, and often will be about brainstorming things, improvements, new ideas, as well as finding defects. In a walkthrough is a type of review where the author is going to lead the audience through the item being reviewed. Inspection is the most formal type of review, and this is a case where you have a trained moderator who is not the author that's in charge of the inspection team. Each member of the team is there for a specific reason. They have a particular role based on their background and experience. It's a formally defined process that includes rules for how each step of the process works, checklists that are to be used with different types of work products, and entry and exit criteria for the process. And inspections, like technical reviews, are supposed to include gathering up defects, metrics, categorization of defects, and so forth for long-term process improvement. Now, this is, what the sort of industry standard IEEE 1028 standard says about different types of reviews, and it's what you'll find in the ISTQB syllabi. But, out in the real world of practice, what we see with our clients is, there's a lot of hybrids, people doing something and calling it something else. See a lot of people talking about JAD sessions, joint application design sessions, which seem to be some type of technical review predominantly. At least that's the way that people use that term. But sometimes we find that people are calling things one thing and it's something else. Like one of our clients is referring to inspections, and I really got into the question of whether they fulfilled all of the things in the inspection. It was actually just more of a walkthrough that they were calling an inspection. What's in a name? Really doesn't matter. As long as everybody inside the organization knows what is meant when we say we're going to have X, where X is any sort of activity, group activity, then to me it doesn't really matter so much what you call it. Again, as long as everybody agrees on what it is we're doing. Now, focusing on the most quantifiable benefit of a review, which is the detection and removal of defects. These are some figures from Capers-Jones, where he looks at the organizations that are least effective at doing reviews, and what percentage of defects they find and remove for 5 different types of work products. Contrast that with companies that are average in their review capabilities, and then contrast that further against companies that are follow best practices. And you see the numbers here. You see the figures here, and there's I think a few salient points here. So I'm going to break out the spotlighter here, and I want to kind of focus on a few things that I think are particularly important. So you see with requirements, high-level design, functional design, detailed design, code, all 5 of these, that there is a significant variation between least effective and most effective. Factor of 2 or more in every case. So it pays to get better and be towards the most effective end of the scale. It's because the cost of removing a defect generally goes up the longer that defect is active, is present and unresolved in the project. So there's a requirements defect introduced. You want to remove it as close to the point of origin as possible. Otherwise, you're going to pay too much for it. And to give you an example of that, we found that one of our clients that had a $1 billion annual IT budget, that they had anywhere from $100 million to $250 million in avoidable failure costs, and that was primarily due to the fact that they weren't getting as much value out of reviews as they could be. There were also problems in their test process that needed to be cleaned up. But the single biggest contributor to the avoidable cost of failure was lack of proper leverage of the capabilities of review. So that's, the more we can push towards the most effective end of the spectrum in the reviews, the better we are. Now, something else that I point out too is, different work products have different levels of effectiveness at the top range too. So obviously code reviews are extremely effective compared to, say, requirements reviews. So if you're looking at, well, should we do more of one and less of the other, I'd say, well, it doesn't make sense to do less of any of these things. But if you're saying we want to improve our reviews and we want to start with where we're going to get the biggest bang for the buck, well, you'd have to do some analysis on where most of the defects are being introduced, to go back to the point I was just making. But in absence of that, if all things being equal, and usually the single work product with the most defects introduced is code, making your code review practices more effective is going to be a huge return. Excuse me, I'm going to get a drink of water here. Take care of the throat problem. Now, another thing that I think is important to point out, and I'm going to change gears here to pen. Let's say that you started with 1,000 defects. And this is odd. This morning when I did this, or this afternoon when I did this, the default shade of the pen was fuchsia. Now it's lime green. Not sure why, but anyway, suppose we start with 1,000 defects. And let's say that we just do the reviews. We're not very good at them, but we do them. Okay. So notice that what comes out of that process is 800 defects. I apologize for my handwriting. I'm trying to do this on a mouse pad, touchpad. Okay. Then we remove 300 or 30% of those, excuse me, and now we get down to 560. And so forth. If you follow the math all the way through on that, you'll see that what comes out of the end is 166. Okay, mentioned down here. Wow, well, that's pretty good to get 83% of the defects removed before you even start formal testing, or informal testing for that matter. Imagine how much differently your testing projects would go if most, not just most, but almost all, 83% defects are removed before you start testing. Now, we do the same math over here, and again, I'm not going to drag you through it with my scribbling lime green ugly pen, but you can do this on your own. What comes out of the process is 3, so 99.7% of the defects removed. Now, most organizations are really not going to be able to get to this level of capability. Certainly, it's a long, no, they're able to, but they're not going to get to that level of capability for various reasons. It won't get that kind of priority. But, this should be well within any organization's capabilities and will, and certainly just making sure, having management make sure that reviews happen and avoiding common pitfalls, and we ought to be able to do that. So most of the defects could be removed before we start testing. Now, I mean, this is a simplification. The actual, in actuality, defects are not introduced all at once in the requirements. They're introduced in every work product, and so there's more of a inflow and outflow that needs to be modeled. Those of you who caught my webinar on quality management versus test management and seen that picture would know what that would look like. But be that as it may, the general idea is still the same, that if we make sure that we've got quality assurance type of activities, such as reviews, happening on every important precursor work product and code work product as it's being created, most of the defects can be removed before we even get into testing, which is all to the good. Now, there's a couple other types of reviews that can come up that are worth mentioning here. They are project reviews, which can also be called management reviews, and then you have process reviews, which are also referred to as audits. Though not every process review necessarily follows all of the rules of an audit. But in a management review, we're about looking at where we are on the project and how are we doing in terms of going forward, and who's got an action item, and who's got issues they need to address, and what decisions should we make, and generally minutes come out of this, and I'm sure most of you probably participate in one of these, and not really thought of it as a review per se, but it's a review that's focused on the project. An audit is more of a process thing. These can be very formalized and potentially even adversarial. There's often this idea of compliance. There's an independent audit team that comes in, and they look at interviews, and they watch things happen. They look at metrics. They look at documents, and then they make a decision about whether you are or are not compliant with some sort of standard or measurement that you are supposed to be held to. So for example, CMMI. If you've ever had your company given a CMMI assessment, that's effectively an audit. A lot of organizations, and RBCS is one of them, don't like to use the word audit for these sort of engagements. We prefer to call them assessments. It's audit just really sets up that adversarial nature and ensures that there's going to be headbutting. Now, here's an example of a formal management review process from one of our clients. Defined change control board, a clearly defined process for submitting change requests and the people to whom this change request should be submitted, what information needs to be present in the change request, the people involved in reviewing it, defined there as the team members, and then there's what are called signature criteria for each one of these reviews, or each one of the reviewers. What does it mean to sign off on something? So, for example, for the test team to sign off on a change request, it was basically saying we have tested this to the degree that we had said we would test this in the test plan. And then there's approval and any notes on implementation of changes. So that's as I say, formalized management review. Now, some general principles of a review. One of these I mentioned before. We want the review to happen as soon as possible. The longer the defect is in the project, running around, it's a wild bug, as I said in a previous presentation, and wild bugs are more dangerous than captive bugs. So we want to capture the bug and kill the bug, ideally, as quickly as possible. Adequate preparation. This is really important. We have found with our clients that next to the proper selection of the review team, which is the most important attribute of a good review, the adequate preparation by the review participants appears to be the second most important influencing factor. I hesitate to say beyond even choice of the process. I think that might be pretty important too, but it's the people that show up inadequately prepared do very shallow work in reviews. Any work product that's going to influence the effectiveness and efficiency of the project, or that is a precursor work product for the system itself, or that is actually the system, such as the code, really should go through a review. So, test plans and test analysis results and so forth, those should also be included. We see that's a mistake that we see a number of organizations making, is not using reviews as broadly as they should. Now, reviews are not a replacement for dynamic testing, such as running unit tests, integration tests, and system tests. They find different kinds of bugs, and that's what we want to make sure that we are maximizing the kinds of the defect removal across the entire process by using the right technique at the right point. So, reviews are a good technique to use early as the work products are being created. And then we get into testing as we have an actual, execution of tests as we have, running system. Now, I said that the choice of participants was, we think, the most important factor, success factor in reviews. And this is not just a matter of opinion for me, though I've certainly seen it enough. This is also something that has been observed and studied. For example, Motorola did a study on this a few years back where they looked at code reviews and they tried to figure out what was the most important factor influencing the success of a code review, and they found that it was indeed the proper participants and the proper number of participants. So it was the right people, including the right number of people. And it said it had to be like 3 to 5, I think, was the optimal number, and they have to represent different perspectives that among them all covered all of the relevant perspectives. So, who are these various participants? What roles do they play? Well, they've got a manager who now, opinions differ about should the manager participate in reviews of work products. I think that, the IEEE 1028 standard purists would say no, they should not participate. The logic being, it can skew their perspective on people, and people's behavior might change if they're in front of their manager. They might feel like they need to be more defensive and refuse to admit that they have problems and so forth. Now, I can understand how that can happen. I can imagine that it could, but I've been, as a manager, also a subject matter expert or senior technical person in groups that I've managed, and eliminating that kind of valuable perspective just out of a blanket rule is probably not the world's greatest thing. I think it's just important that if you are a manager and you're participating in a work product review, that you make sure that you set aside your management role and that everybody recognizes that you have set aside your management role. Probably one of the good ways of doing that is have somebody else be the leader or moderator of the meeting, and that you sit there and really try to say as little as possible, unless some important point is going to go by the boards, unless you jump in. A lot of times people get into management positions because they're extroverts. They have very powerful personalities. So if you're one of those type of managers, restrain yourself in the meeting. Try to let other people do most of the talking. That will help reinforce anything you say about, I'm stepping out of my management role here and participating as a ordinary reviewer. We do have the moderator or author, moderator or leader who's in charge of the review. And this is really important, too, to have the right person here. We had a client report to us once a story about a review of a requirement specification that almost ended in a fist fight. I think it's probably fair to say that I wasn't there, but I would guess that there was poor moderation was a real contributor to that contentious scenario. So, a good moderator is really important in an effective review. Of course, the author should participate in the review as a person there to explain why things are the way they are, but certainly not to defend. Right? It should not be a defensive type of role. It should be explanatory. You got to have the right reviewers participating, and as I mentioned before, they could play special roles, or have special perspectives, and then there should be somebody assigned to take notes on what the findings are and get those to the author, if it's not the author themselves taking the notes, and make sure that the defects that were identified actually get resolved. In some cases, there can be some additional roles involved in reviews, like a project management review or an audit. There would tend to be, say, stakeholders or maybe customer representatives present. Excuse me. Dry throat here. So let's look at some factors for success, starting with some technical factors. So, have a defined process. Definitely good to have an established process for the reviews. Everybody knows what happens and I'm comfortable with it. Definitely know your costs and benefits. Document the return on investments and be able to show that to people. I think that one of the main reasons why reviews don't happen anywhere near as much as they should is because management doesn't have a clear understanding of the benefits that are being realized, and so they don't make it a priority. So, capture those costs and benefits. You You can review early drafts, partial documents if you need to, so you don't want to be rigid and say, oh, that's not done, we can't review that. Especially technical reviews can be very useful. And I'm going to show you an example later of a review of a test plan that happened against an early draft that was really helpful. Having defined entry and exit criteria is useful so you can recognize when you're done, when the process has completed a particular step. Have checklists, and not just organization specific as mentioned here, but also work product specific. Have a different checklist for the kind of problems you'd look for in, say, a test plan or a project plan than the kind of problems that you look for in a requirement specification. Be flexible in terms of the types of reviews that you use. Be ready to use different types of reviews for different work products. So, for example, I would use, say, an informal review on a bug report. And I do like to have bug reports reviewed by people before they get filed and sent to the wider team. But I would not want those to be held up for such a review and end up taking days to get out, right? I mean, you don't want that to happen quickly, so speed is of the essence. Versus, say, a requirement specification or a user story, that's the basis of the system being built, that needs to be subjected to more scrutiny. Definitely make sure that people are focusing on the important content elements, not format. I had a funny story once about an organization that actually, in their code reviews, banned any discussion of coding standards or indentation or how comments were formatted, any of that kind of stuff, because it just became a huge black hole that people's time was falling into. So, what they did is they just basically said, well, we're going to use static analysis to enforce coding standards, but these simply cannot discuss these in code reviews. So, I think that's a good thing to do. Have templates for different kinds of documents, and then just say, discussions about whether something is or is not following the template, or whether the template is correct or simply disallowed in the reviews, and the focus has to be entirely on the content. So some organizational factors. We have at the top of the list here one that I think is very important, this issue of allowing adequate time. Again, tied to the fact that a lot of managers don't know about what the benefit is, so they're not inclined to allow much time at all. They see it as something, well, we should do reviews because it's the best practice, but let's try to spend as little time on it as possible because we got other important things to do. So I think it's sort of a issue of making sure that management understands the value that's going to be received, and then they will tend to allow time for it. Now, I mentioned that gathering metrics out of the process, and I think that's very important, including various counts of how many defects of which type and so forth. To be very careful with metrics, because it's not unusual for managers to confuse process metrics for people metrics. In other words, a metric that's measuring the capability of a particular process, which is defined by management, is instead misconstrued to be measuring the capability of the people carrying out the process. This is so famous that there's actually something by Deming, which you can find easily enough on the internet, called the red bead black bead experiment. I encourage you to take a look at that. You want to see how damaging this can be. Another thing that's really important, and this is not a problem that just happens with reviews, it happens all forms of testing. Planning testing on the assumption that no defects will be found, and thus failing to allocate any time for the rework of the defects, happens a lot more than it should. You definitely want to plan the reviews on the assumption that we will find defects, and the author will need some time to rework the defects to fix the problems. Participation is important. One of the ways to make sure the participants do participate is to have them submit notes prior to the review meeting itself on what their findings are so far as a result of their preparation. And if anybody doesn't submit something or says, oh, I haven't found anything yet, make the assumption that they haven't actually done the preparation and say, okay, we're going to postpone this meeting until everybody has done their preparation. And, that happens maybe once with somebody. They'll probably get the point of maybe that wasn't the wisest thing that I should do. Make sure that you gather data that will support process improvement. Now, when you think about finding a defect, there's the immediate tactical need of, okay, we've located a defect. We want to track that defect from its discovery through to its resolution. Often in a document review, that's done through some sort of change tracking of the document. You can say, okay, yep, that's gone. Right? That's the immediate tactical issue. But there's a bigger issue, which is that there are patterns that tend to exist in defect introduction in organizations. And if you don't capture certain kinds of classification information about the defects that are being found in reviews, you can't see those patterns emerge from the data. So, make sure that you capture enough data about the defects being found in the reviews to be able to support good process improvement techniques, based on the data. People factors, of course, can also be very important in any process, and reviews are no exception. People need to understand we are going to find defects, and in fact, it should be thought of as that's good to find defects. And don't blame people. Point your finger at the author. Oh, look at that piece of junk. I can't believe you submitted that for review. The idea should be, hey, this is a good process. It's going to save us money. It's going to save us time in the long run. So if we find defects, that's all to the good. That helps us out. Now, there's also an important psychological thing there, of making sure that the authors don't feel bullied, so that they will continue to want to have reviews. It shouldn't be a situation where the author's like, oh, God, I've got to have something reviewed, and then I'm just going to get, savaged by the review team, and I hate this process, and why do we have to have it? I mean, that if people feel that way about going into reviews, that there's been some damage done. We want to get people together thinking, constructively, collaboratively. How can we make sure that this work product is the best work product that we could produce? Now, reviews, sometimes they work and sometimes they don't work so good. Here's an example of it not working so good. We had a project, an internet appliance project, where we were sent a marketing requirements document early on, start developing our tests from it. And that resulted, that was effectively an informal review, and that resulted in us generating a bunch of questions about many of the features, and you see some of the questions about the mail feature here. You notice that a couple of these things, items 2 and 3, are marked as TBD, to be determined. Unfortunately, they never really were determined. Well, they were. The way they were determined was that we ran tests against those particular capabilities and saw how the system actually behaved. And because the behavior was completely undocumented, there was no way of saying what constituted correct behavior, we went ahead and in those cases reported defects and said, well, we don't know if this is correct or not. This is what it's doing. You tell us. A lot of those defects, of course, defect reports were, of course, false positives that ended up getting bounced out in the whole defect triage process. That is not very productive. If you look at the first one, when we talk about the mailboxes getting deleted when their trial period expires, they get a warning. Their answer there is really not an answer. It's saying, well, it's not something that affects testing because the telemarketer will give the warning. Well, yeah, but the user's not going to automatically call, right? I mean, what's going to happen if the user doesn't call is that the trial period ends and the mailboxes do what? Do they go away? Do they not go away? It's not clear what happens. So even the one answer we got was sort of a non-answer. Excuse me. And, this had some consequences. We weren't able to get all of the issues resolved, as you can see, and then basically we, the developers, the marketing people, all proceeded with our work, open questions. Now, one of the managers, our client contact, came to me when we were kind of going around and around with the marketing people trying to get resolution to these questions, and said, you know, you got to stop pestering the marketing people with all these questions. And I said, well, I'd love to. The problem is that, you know, given the amount of questions that we have now, we estimate that we would have about a 20 to 25% efficiency hit trying to test with all this vagueness. And I explained to him the issue of, you know, we're going to be filing bug reports on behavior that might be correct because we have no way of knowing whether it's correct, and it's just, you know, it's going to be a mess. He said, you know, I would rather pay the extra money right now than have these people learn how to write proper requirements. I accept that they're not writing proper requirements, but you're just going to have to play the hand you're dealt. I said, okay, you know, as long as we understand, you know, we've had this conversation, and that's fine. And what happened was, as I said earlier, that we did have a very high rate of false positives. The other thing that kind of surprised me at the time, though now reflecting on it over the years, this has come to be really clear to me. We also had a lot of false negatives. In other words, we missed a lot of bugs that I think we could have caught. Our defect detection effectiveness was only 75% on that project versus the industry average, which seems to be about 85%. I think what happened was there was just so much noise and confusion about what the system was supposed to do that it was just as easy to confuse correct behavior for incorrect behavior as it was to confuse incorrect behavior for correct behavior. So I think that's something to help people understand, is that in the absence of clarity in terms of what the requirements are, what the expected behavior of the system is, you know, testing will take a significant hit in terms of its effectiveness and its efficiency. Now, interesting contrast with that, same project and a very similar, you know, partially overlapping cast of characters here. Was involved in doing a review of test plan. Now, I mentioned, you know, you can have early drafts reviewed, and so I actually did this twice. I sent out a first draft of the test plan. It was very, very much a skeletal kind of thing. It had a lot of sort of placeholders in there, but questions about, you know, what should happen here, what should happen there. And then once I got the answers to those questions back, I sent out a second document, much more fleshed out, but also with some more detailed questions, as well as being filled in terms of where I had gotten the answers. And that proved to be a very effective way of reviewing the test plans. Informal, but you take a look at some of the answers that I got back here. You know, really meaty, detailed response from one of the folks, and I'm only showing a few of the, I think it was like a dozen or so specific points that he addressed in his very thoughtful email that he sent back, which then informed the next version of that document. And some of this stuff was just really key. So get the highlighter going here. We had been told that we were going to have to test up to 500,000 users. We're going to have to be able to simulate 500,000 users for reliability and performance testing. And we were really sort of thrashing around trying to figure out, you know, how are we going to do that? Well, look at this. He takes a look at it and goes, you know, we're actually not going to need to do that. We're only going to need 100,000. So that was a huge load off our mind, because it made it creating the load generator a lot easier. Now, with respect to exit criteria, take a look here. He mentioned something that we did not know was going to be a priority, but it made sense, which was to have an exit criteria that specifically discussed reliability, how long the system should be. I apologize. I'm not sure what just happened there. I was trying to get into a different mode, and it just, yeah. He said wanting to have the system up and running for 24 hours, right, for at least a week. That was not something that had been discussed before. Certainly an important thing to do. Also, he has an interesting question about, you know, how long is it going to take to get through system testing. So, you know, good topic to discuss with the development manager. Here he is taking ownership for definition of what is must fix, what's must fix for defects. So that's a problem for us if that's not defined, us in testing, but he's now saying I'm going to fix that. And also I pointed out that we wanted to get release notes, and he said, yep, you definitely need to get better in terms of our test release management, and we will start to provide you with release notes. So process, very effective. The review process is very effective in the case of the test plan, but not in the case of the marketing requirements document. Same project, and as I said, same sort of cast of characters. So what's the difference? Well, I think one of the key differences is, as the author of the test plan, I specifically sought out input from the different stakeholders and proactively pulling it in and incorporating it and so forth. Versus if you look at the MRD, we started to give them input on areas where that document was vague or insufficient, and they just got defensive and went and complained, said we don't want that kind of input. So, again, the willingness of the author to engage in the process effectively, I think, is really key. Now, let's say you've been listening to all this and going, well, this is great, need to get more reviews in place. What do I need to do? Well, first on the list here, we have securing management support. This is for any kind of process improvement. I think this is very important. Make sure that you do have good management support of a change that you're trying to make. And then that's all going to go down to, the business case. Be ready to explain to people this is the business case, and be ready to demonstrate that later. Capture the metrics that you need to be able to say, look, well, this is how much money we're saving. This is why this is important. Make sure that people have the structures they need, such as checklists and some defined plan process, and train them in the process so that they know how to participate properly. Make sure that the participants that are going to be involved support the process. They're not just going to show up and read their email. In fact, it might make sense to make the reviews a computer-free zone and say, do not bring your computer to this. We're going to have one computer in the room. That's going to be the one with the work product on it. We're going to be beaming it up projecting it up onto the wall, and we're going to go through that. But no computers allowed, no smartphones allowed. Make sure that people actually support the process and participate. Do some pilots. Pilots are, in our experience with various process changes with clients, always a good idea. So I'd recommend some pilots, and get something together you think is good enough to try. Give it a try. Learn some lessons and make some improvements. Now, on this thing of the business case, I want to just stress this and make sure this is clear so that everybody's walking away from this going, well, yeah, business case, but what would that be? Okay, what are you going to need for the business case? You're going to need metrics, and the metrics are basically going to have to measure a couple things. One is how much time is spent on the reviews. And this will need to be accurately estimated and include all the sort of overhead times of defining the review process and those sort of things, participant preparation time, as well as the review meetings themselves. Don't just count the review meetings, because management's going to then gain a skewed view of how much time they need to set aside for this, and in planning you won't get enough time for the review. So, show the size of the true cost by making sure you count all of the costs, and then count the defects. At the very least, count the raw number of defects. So I would highly encourage you to develop a classification scheme that's consistent with the classification scheme used for defects that are found during testing, and that you classify the review defects in that same scheme if they have to do with either precursor work products like requirements or design specifications, or actual system work products like code and configuration tables and metadata and those sort of things. The reason for this is you're going to want to be able to merge that data together to make intelligent process improvement decisions, and if the classification fields aren't compatible, you won't be able to do that. The other thing that you're going to need to look at is what is the average effort associated with the removal of a defect in a system test, and the average effort associated with removal of a defect in the field. This doesn't have to be very precise. This can be thumbnail estimates. Usually the difference between those cost of a defect found and fixed in a review versus a defect found and fixed in system test versus a defect found and fixed in production. Usually the difference in those costs is so dramatic that, rough estimate that could be off plus or minus 50% one way or the other isn't going to undermine the fundamental business case, which is we're saving a ton of money on reviews. Now, some companies are more sensitive to time to market than they are to actual effort. They're like, look, cynically, they might not be saying this out loud, but managers might be thinking, going, hey, if there's more work to be done later in the project, tough luck. That just means unpaid overtime for the staff, and they can like it or not. But the thing is with that is the staff size is usually fixed on a project. So if there's a lot of effort associated with removing defects late in the project, guess what? You're taking risk in terms of going to market, certainly in terms of going to market with a quality product. Both of these things can be quantified and explained to management, and will really make a difference in terms of their level of support in terms of this process. All right, so quick conclusion here, and we'll get into the Q&A. We've looked at application of the concept of reviews to, of course, find defects, but also to discuss alternatives, as we saw in the test plan and test plan review, and increase understanding of the system that's being built. It happened. We tried to make that happen in the marketing requirements document review. It didn't happen too well because we didn't have the author support. Now, this is, as I said, kind of filling in the last page on our last uncolored square, if you will, in the whole advanced software testing series. And we've covered black box techniques, white box techniques, and static analysis techniques. And now we've got reviews, and we're going to talking today about creative thinking from the stakeholders and the participants in the review, and how to be better, how to make things better. And from the management point of view, again, key benefit here: save money and potentially save time. If anybody says, "Oh, well, we're on a tight schedule, we don't have time for reviews," I always say, well, if you're on a tight schedule, you don't have time not to do reviews, because the last thing you need is a bunch of previously undiscovered defects blowing up in your face in system test. You need to focus on getting those out early. All right, so as usual, during the Q&A period, I will put the advertisement up, and we will now get the Q&A pane here up and running on the screen for me. Let's see. Russell asks, will the provider ID and information to report PDUs be provided in the attendance email? Yes, I believe it is. Kanchana has a question. We can see that reviews generally precede testing. They are considered to be static testing, while the system test and system integration test, UAT, are dynamic. So having said that, question is, how important is reviews during testing? You were elaborating about change requests. We do see change requests occurring as a result of testing. So reviews are important there as well. Yeah, I think that's an interesting point, Shauna. We think of reviews as proceeding in the sense of, a lot of the reviews are focused on precursor work products, okay, and the code itself. And so, those things are all going to precede static testing. Obviously, the review of any precursor work product has to precede the dynamic testing. The review of a precursor work product, like a requirements specification or a design specification, has to precede the dynamic testing, because there's nothing there to dynamically test at that particular moment, right? Now, we talk about other types of work products that are neither precursor work products nor code themselves, such as change requests, potentially test cases themselves, for example, which are not precursor work products. Really, they're derivative work products in a way. Those can be reviewed prior to testing, but after the precursor work products are reviewed, and reviews really can continue throughout the project. I mean, most of the projects that I've worked on that were well managed, there would be regular, like weekly project status reviews where we would sit down, all the project managers, and those are not work product reviews, they are project reviews, but they're reviews nonetheless. Similar kinds of rules would apply. So Nikita asks, can a tester or a test manager initiate the review process? Well, certainly for a test-related work product, and absolutely you can. So in other words, a test plan, quality risk analysis results, bug reports, test status reports, any sort of test-generated work product, I think you can and you should initiate the review process. Now, what I think you were kind of trying to get at here, Nikita, what about reviews of other people's work products? We have seen clients where one of the services offered by the testing group, which often called QA group in that particular case, one of the services they offered was facilitating, organizing, and tracking the results of various kinds of reviews. And we've seen that be very successful. But I want to be clear that, the phrase I used there, service they offered. What they did is they didn't just stand up and say, we are going to start doing reviews and we're going to make everybody do them because that's the best practice, because that won't work. What they did was they got support of management and key stakeholders in the organization about, would it be helpful for us to offer a service of organizing and tracking and supporting reviews? And would people be interested in that? They basically sold their involvement in that, and that then led to it being successful. So yes, you can, Nikita, but be careful in the way that you go about it. Nikita's got another question here. Where does a review process fit in an agile environment such as Scrum? So I would say that given the pace of Scrum and other agile life cycles, reviews are as important as ever. Now, you want to try to get defects out as early as possible, no matter what life cycle you're in. But in an agile world, you really don't have a lot of recovery time, right? So, I mean, if there's defects in the code that don't get found in a code review in a sequential life cycle model that's got 12 weeks of system tests planned, obviously that does create a problem, but you do have some buffer time there for getting those problems out. In the case of an agile life cycle model, you just really don't have a whole lot of time available to get things out. So, more reviews I think are appropriate in agile, or at least all the reviews that would be appropriate in the sequential life cycle are also appropriate in agile. You just have to adapt them. Generally the off-the-shelf agile types of processes that you see out there with a lot of clients. There's consulting companies that go around the world pushing a particular implementation of agile, and they manage to sell people on that, and they come in and they give them the sort of off-the-rack agile, and it usually includes some kind of like user story reviews and acceptance criteria reviews and test case reviews and so forth. Start with those and then tailor them to make them more effective as time goes on. That's going to be a more effective approach. Let's see. Satya Raja asks, if one has to prioritize efforts on test reviews, where to put available money? Unit testing or integration testing? I assume you meant or system testing. why would we say we're going to only do some kind of reviews and not others when any kind of review of testing work products is going to make the testing ultimately more effective and efficient? The time spent on the reviews is going to have a positive return on investment, so why are we going to have to prioritize it all? Now, if you're saying, okay, I don't want to necessarily prioritize, but where do I start? I think that's a question of where is your greatest inefficiency from a test process point of view right now, and what's the cause of it? You want to try to find out where waste is and go after waste. And if waste is associated with, we have work products that are being developed and put into use without actually looking at them carefully enough beforehand, that results in a lot of problems, then that's going to tell you where to focus. I don't see any reason why you wouldn't want to do all of them. Yukong asks, I was asked to review unfinished design documents. Should I say no? How should I say no without offending the author? So I don't think you should say no, Yukong. I think you should say yes. I think you should say, yes, I'd be happy to take a look at that, and can you tell me when the complete design documents will be ready? Because it could very well be that the reason that you're being asked to review these unfinished design documents is that the author respects your opinion and would like your insights. And, that's, it's good that you're being sensitive to not wanting to offend the author. And if the author, that's the motivation the author has, I'm going to ask Yukong to take a look at this because he's a really smart guy and I like his ideas and the way he thinks, then by all means take a look at it. Just make sure that that's not construed as, you gave your opinions and then they go back and go, oh, Yukong looked at this and this are his comments and I've addressed those comments, therefore we're done. Right? That's the thing you want to avoid here, is the idea that, the review is a formality. We can do a review at any point, even if the document's not done, and then having done that, then the document can be finalized without any further review. So, try to consider the context of it. Let's see. Kanchana says, thanks for the explanation. The point on service offering was interesting. I'm glad you felt that way. Yeah, I think that's a really key point, and I've said this before in other webinars. If you haven't heard them, you might go and listen to some of the recorded ones. But this idea of testing as a service organization, the more I'm in this consulting business and the more I see different organizations, some different testing organizations, some struggling and some being successful, and it's just so often that's the differentiator between the successful and the unsuccessful testing organizations is, do they see themselves as offering a service or do they see themselves as process or quality cops? The service offering organizations are just often so much more successful. It's like one of the things I've learned from doing a lot of consulting that I wish I knew when I was just doing more projects, because it really would have made a difference, I think, in my my day-to-day work. Manish wrote, joined already. Manish, I have no idea what you're wanting me to respond to there, but if you want to submit a question, do go right ahead. Okay, so that winds up the questions. If there are any questions, I see one. Here's one last question here from Jason. Is there any number of review limit in a typical V-model SDLC? No, there's really no number of review limit. Basically it's, we want to review the work products. Obviously, you want to do it in a way that's efficient. So there shouldn't just be, we're in our 20th round of reviews on the project plan. I mean, if that's going on, then something's broken. But use reviews as long as they continue to generate a positive return on investment. It's kind of pretty much like anything else. If it's saving you time and money, do it. Okay. So as we close this session, I'll just mention that if you do have any follow-up questions that come to you at this point, feel free to send them to me. I see one last question I'm going to get from Yukon because it's a follow-up that clarifies what he had asked before, and then we'll wind this down. Yukon says, when the review became a formality, the final design document was never finished. What should I do? Well, okay, so this depends on your role, Yukon. I mean, if you are concerned that you are being asked to review something purely for the purposes of saying to a client or a stakeholder that document was reviewed, you know that the review that you're doing is really a sham, you know, that's something that you need to escalate your concerns. And I see you just added that you're a senior test analyst. You know, what I would suggest, if you feel like you're being put in a situation where you're being asked to basically rubber stamp something, as we'd say in the United States, to approve something without really looking at it, you know, that's going to put you in a difficult spot. I think you need to escalate those concerns to your manager and see, you know, what their take on it is. But, you know, be very careful about getting yourself into a process cop role. You were like, you know, mentioning earlier about wanting to refuse and you know, force good practice effectively on them. You know, really be careful about that. I did a webinar on that a while ago, and you know, just watch out. I mean, that's a common mistake that organizations make and individuals make, and I'd want you to, you know, avoid shooting yourself in the foot. We've got another question here, going to come in right over the transom. With reviews being an essential part of the testing lifecycle, should the reviews be a part of the overall test estimates? Absolutely. They should be an overall part of the project estimates for sure. If you, as the test manager, are in charge of reviews, Brajesh, then you know you should definitely include that in your test estimate. If it's a larger project thing, the project manager should include it. But definitely, yeah, estimate for it. Because otherwise, what's going to happen is that it will appear as if in the early parts of the project is falling behind because it's taking time to do these reviews, and then management will start to stress out and say, got to hurry up, and then that's going to lead to curtailing of the reviews, which then ironically is going to create a real time crunch later in the project, and it would create the illusion in that situation. The illusion would be created that, you know, we squandered a bunch of time early on in the project doing reviews, and then when we got to the system testing, we found a bunch of bugs anyway. So that would be absolutely the worst of both worlds. So, you know, yes, do make sure that you've got a realistic estimation of how much time and energy is going to be required for these reviews, and that is part of your estimate. Final comment from Yukon here. Thanks for your advice. Yukon, I wish you the best of luck with the situation that you're dealing with. It's there can be some interesting politics when you're in testing, and it sounds like you're running into some of it. Okay, so we're going to wind it down here. If there are any further questions that occur to you or that I did not address, send them to info@rbcs-us.com. Indicate that they are a good blog topic, and I will address those at the appropriate point. So a little more about the resources from RBCS. You got the free webinars. Make sure you sign up for those when they're of interest. If you want a webinar presentation for your company that relates to any topic having to do with software testing, you send an email, info@rbcs-us.com. You can sign up for our newsletter, which will get you discounts on our services and also featured articles and news about what we're doing. We're on Twitter at RBCS, and we're also on Facebook, RBCS-INC. Now, for those of you who attended, check your email. You might be the lucky winner of a free e-learning course. And also check out my blog, rbcs-us.com/blog. Post comments on the extensive existing topics that have been covered on the blog, or email me about new topics that you'd like to discuss. And be sure to check out the digital library. I mentioned the basic library and the advanced libraries earlier, but the digital library has recordings of the webinars, podcasts, and videos. You can get audio versions of the podcasts off of iTunes, enter RBCS podcast into the search string, and you can see videos and recorded webinars by subscribing to the RBCS channel on YouTube. We offer these free resources as a service to the software testing community because at RBCS we are a not just for profit company. Thanks to all of you for joining us. I look forward to seeing you at future webinars.